can put in with their donations, I would greatly appreciate it. So the next 2 Thursdays, if you want to bring anything in.
All right, thank you, Jan. Herschel, do you have any foundation updates that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I need money. And a bunch of, right now, the money that we, sent in for selling of the tickets and all of that has actually processed in, Rotary. So at this point, we're sitting at $10,890 for the annual fund given so far, with a goal of $14,000. So we're about $3,100 short of our goal. We still have the rest of the year up until the end of June to collect that. I would really love to hit that before that date, but I'll be probably sending out some emails and talking to people and everything as far as possibly wanting to give and matching points and stuff like that over the next month or so. See how much closer we can get to that goal. Also, Polio Plus, we're still $1,000 goal. We're still at $400. So if anybody wants to give to the Polio Plus fund, just let me know. Get with me and everything, and I'll be glad to take care of that for you. You know, but that's pretty much where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you, Herschel. And we have a foundation program scheduled for the first Thursday in April, is that right? Okay, looking forward to that. Any other, Jeff, would you like to offer any implement fund updates? Okay,
Working on some stuff.
we'll catch you next time. Okay, thank you, sir. Any other announcements before we get started? Is that an announcement? No? Okay. Stephanie, would you like to take this and introduce our program speaker today?
Well, I'll speak loud enough. He may need that, I don't know. But today's guest speaker, everyone knows Jack. Everyone loves Jack, and we're excited to hear what he's got to tell us about everything that's going on in Israel and all that he has found out. So please welcome.
Thank you. So I thought I'd share with you, some of you know my background, but one of the things that I'm involved with that you're not familiar with because I don't talk about it is I'm heavily involved in a think tank that we deal with national security issues for America, Israel, and the Mideast. And my involvement in that gives me access to the leadership of this country, the leadership in the military, both in Israel and the U.S. and other countries. And part of the purpose today is Jewish Americans that are involved in this are asked to go out into the communities and talk about what's happening in Israel and to share with you the reality. And I just want you to know anything that I share with you today is factual. I'm not going to be political. It's factual. And then you can share this with anybody you want if you're having a conversation in your Sunday school class or whatever. But it's also important, and I was thinking about how to share this with everyone here today. I was pretty confident that many of you probably don't really know the history of the Jewish people and one of the main purposes of why Israel was founded. And after World War II, there was an expression after Israel became a country that the expression was never again. And I don't know if anyone has ever heard that expression, but the Jews in Europe were basically led to their slaughter like lambs because they didn't have the ability to fight back the Germans. And over 6 million Jews were killed. And they weren't the only group that were killed by the Germans. There were many others. But actually, never again goes back through millennia, because through millennia, there was a lot of transgressions that took place around the world against Jews. And I want to help you understand. You've got to understand. It's important that you understand these things to begin to understand the psyche and what's going on with the Israeli leadership, trying to deal with what happened on October 7th, 2023. Because what happened on October 7th has happened over and over again to Jewish people around the world through millennia. But it's also not lost on me, nor should it be lost on anyone here, that humankind can be barbaric. They can be barbaric. And many people through history have been slaughtered. They've been enslaved. been put down by people who thought they were righteous for religious reasons or for political purposes. And for example, I can think of Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, and what happened there. If you don't know the history, you should look it up. Or the genocide in Rwanda, the religious wars in Europe between the 14 and 1500s, between Catholics and Protestants killing each other because they wanted to figure out, who was right and which way to pray to Jesus. I mean, as a Jew, that kind of blows my mind. But there were actually Jewish holidays that we have a holiday coming up shortly called Purim, and it's in the book of Esther. And some of you may have studied it in Sunday school, where in Persia, the country tried to create genocide against the Jewish people. And we don't celebrate that, but every year the Jewish people come together through services. It's a holiday to remember that. The Passover, I'm sure everyone studied what happened with the Jews in Egypt. We were enslaved. And so that is a holiday that we don't celebrate, but we come together to remember that happened to our people. And more recently, World War II. But the conversation that I want to have with you today goes back, maybe not millennia, but I'm going to take you back about 150 years. And I'm going to tell you a family story. And every Jewish family that comes from Europe has a similar story that I'm going to share with you. So the Jews that were from Germany, lived in Germany or certain parts of Hungary, Austria, they were allowed to assimilate into the Christian community. They became doctors, lawyers, scientists, mathematicians, artists, and they were able to add value to those communities. But the rest of Europe, they were not allowed to assimilate. So the Jewish people around Europe lived in little villages called shtetls. And they lived together, they worshiped together, they did business together, but it was a policy of these governments to inflict on these shtetls, these villages, what's called a pogrom. And October 7th was a pogrom. A pogrom is a bloodbath. And these bloodbaths took place, at least for the last couple hundred years in Europe. And so this is a personal story that happened in my family. In 1918, my grandfather was 6 years old, my mother's father. He was born in Lithuania. He saw his mother and little brother die from the Spanish flu. His father's so distraught, he gives my grandfather to his grandfather to raise because his father's so distraught. That would be my great-great-grandfather. Now I'm going to take a step back. Has anyone ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof? Do you remember in the wedding scene, during the wedding scene, where the Russians came in and destroyed the gifts? And I don't know if you remember that scene, but that was a very light version of a pogrom. So on this particular night, the Russians came into my grandfather's village, took all the men and all the male children to the woods to murder them. And somehow, all the male children were allowed to go back to the village. And thank God that's why I'm here. But in the meantime, my great-great-grandfather, as many Jewish families had to deal with, was murdered in the woods that night. And that was a pogrom. The pogrom, the Russians would come in, they would rape the women, they would murder the men, they would burn the houses, they would burn their buildings down. And this happened over and over again through Europe. There was an intellectual in the 1890s. His name was Theodor Herzl. And Theodor Herzl wrote a paper and said, well, for the Jews to be safe in Europe, and for the Jewish people to be safe around the world, they need their own country to provide security. Because at that point, the Jewish people weren't really thinking about reestablishing Israel. They were just trying to survive. The Jewish people at that point created organizations and began lobbying European leaders and leaders around the world to be able to establish Israel as their country so that they could all go back to that. So, you move forward, it's World War I. And the British and the American, the Allies are fighting the Germans and the Austrian-Hungary Empire. The British cut a deal with the Saud family that became king of Saudi Arabia, the Hussein family that became Jordan, and the Jews that were living in Israel, and they cut a deal called the Balfour Agreement. And the Balfour Agreement and the agreement made with the Saud family and Hussein family was established that if they helped the British win the war, then they would all get their own country. And that was, and so after the war, King Saud got Saudi Arabia. The Hussein family got Jordan. The Arab communities basically lobbied Britain to not allow the Jews to get their country. And so at that point, Israel wasn't created. So then you move forward and you have World War II. And in World War II, we all know the story that over 6 million Jews were slaughtered. Then you come to 1948. 1948, the United Nations recognized Israel as a country. David Ben-Gurion becomes the first prime minister of Israel, and he hires a Jewish American named Mickey Marcus, who was a West Point graduate, full board colonel in the US Army, to become the commanding general of the Israeli forces. Because what happened was 7 countries went to war against Israel. The Arab countries that surrounded Israel, they all went to war against Israel, and Israel didn't really have an army. They didn't have an air force. They had a couple little planes. They didn't have any tanks. They put machine guns on jeeps, and by a miracle, Israel won that war. But this is what's important to this day that you need to understand. The Arab families that lived in Israel in 1948 that picked up arms against Israel, it's those families and their descendants that live in the West Bank and the Gaza. The Arab families that did not pick up arms against Israel that time, they became Israeli citizens, and their descendants are Israeli citizens, and they participate and they cohabitate with the citizens of Israel. They get all the benefits of being an Israeli citizen. Okay, so what's hard for them is their relatives live in the West Bank and Gaza. And let me tell you, living in the West Bank and the Gaza, even before October 7th, before the war started out, is very difficult. And when I was being vetted for the ambassadorship, I recognize, and we all should recognize, you cannot hold the people down generation after generation. If you hold the people down generation after generation, and you don't give them the opportunity to improve the lives of their children so their children's lives could be better than them, they're going to fight back. And that is the problem, and that is a mistake that the Israelis made in 1948. You got to understand, in 1948, Israel was founded by Holocaust survivors. And they were founded by Jews that were trying to create this country. And all they knew was fighting. And when they won this war against 7 other countries, all they did was they moved these Arab families into the West Bank. And so that was a big mistake, and it continues to be a big mistake today. All right, so becomes 1967. 1967's known as the 6-Day War. And Israel goes to war against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. And in that war, Israel wins it in 6 days. They win the Gaza Strip from Egypt. They win the entire Jerusalem, because at one point, half of Jerusalem was cut off by the Jordanians. They win all of Jerusalem from Jordan, and they win the Sinai Desert from Egypt. They won the, I've already said that. They won the Golan Heights from Syria. Has anyone ever been to Israel? Okay, I'm not going to go there. So now you go to 1993. In 1993, Bill Clinton is president, and he creates the Oslo Accord. The Oslo Accord is a peace deal between Israel and the PLO, the Palestinians. Okay, at that point, the Palestinians only living in the West Bank, and Arafat is their leader. Yitzhak Rabin is the prime minister of Israel. They shake hands. They together cut a peace deal to allow the Palestinians to create their own nation. And the West Bank is going to become the Palestinian nation. What ends up happening is Yitzhak Rabin comes back to Israel. He's murdered by a Jew. Arafat goes back to the West Bank, and the Arabs tell him, "You cut this deal, we're going to kill you." So the Oslo Accord it didn't get consummated. But part of that deal was that Israel was going to give the Gaza to the Palestinians. And at that point, remember I said that Israel won the Gaza in the 67 war. It is a beautiful piece of land. When Trump says it could be the Riviera, I'm telling you, It could be. Right now, it's a dump. But Israel moves all the Jews out of the Gaza, cost Israel $14 billion to move all the Jews out in 1993 when $14 billion was a lot of money. But the deal never gets consummated. Technically, the Gaza is still owned by Israel. But I can tell you firsthand, Israel doesn't want it. They don't know what to do with it. But that takes us to 1993. All right. So in June 14, 2007, there's an election. Abbas is the prime minister or the leader of the Palestinians of the West Bank. George W. Bush is president of the United States. And they allow the Palestinians to have their first election in Gaza. And the thought between the Bush administration at that time was that Abbas would become the leader of both the West Bank and Gaza. Now that's important. The reason why that would have been important is that the problem that Israel has in trying to deal with the Palestinians, there's not one leader. They're trying to, it's impossible to cut a deal with the people when you've got multiple groups and multiple leaders, and you can't negotiate with, they're trying to negotiate with multiple leaders. They can't cut a deal to create safety. What ends up happening is Hamas wins the election, and in 2007, Hamas is known to be a terrorist group. The question is, how do they win the election? They were putting guns to the Palestinian people's faces, and they were actually throwing people off of high-rise buildings and threatening families to kill them all. That's how Hamas won that election. And Hamas takes over power on the Gaza. Yeah.
Explain Hamas and the Palestinians, the difference between the two.
Well, so Hamas is a political organization that is a terrorist organization made up of Palestinian people that are, and they're the leadership, and they're a terrorist group with their own army that run Gaza, and they're all Palestinians. One of the things you need to understand about Gaza and the Palestinians that the news is not reporting is, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but the Palestinian people that live in Gaza are pro-Hamas. The majority of the Palestinians that live in Gaza may not be combatants because they're men, they're women and children, but they are all pro-Hamas. And that's a problem that I'll get to in a minute. So the other thing I need to take a step, the thing you need to understand is Iran is pulling the strings to a large extent. Iran has created and provides Hamas, which controls the Gaza. They support Hezbollah up north, that's in Lebanon, and they support the Houthis in Yemen. And Iran calls this group the Circle of Fire. And the purpose of Iran using this group that circles Israel is to use them as their proxies to fight, so it doesn't come back to Iran. All right, and so it's important that you understand that. So now we come to October 7th, 2023, and I explained to you that this is known as a pogrom. Now, the first thing I want you to know, it was a complete intelligence failure. And there were two reasons why it was an intelligence failure. The first reason was that the leadership of Israel saw something happening in Gaza. They recognized that Hamas was working on something, but the leadership did not believe for 1 second that Hamas would attack Israel, because in the prior war, Israel decimated Hamas. So they did not believe Hamas would actually try to fight again. That's the first thing. The second thing is Israel was in political crisis going into October 7th. And the political crisis was all political. And it's going to take me a second to help you understand what was happening. In America, we have a constitution. Israel does not have a constitution. They do not have a set of laws like we do that control how things work that we have in America. And their Supreme Court, they have a Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court through history has been selected. The justices on the Israeli Supreme Court are selected by a very liberal panel of judges. Okay, in America, we have the judiciary branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the legislative branch with all equal powers. And they work together and they work against each other to slow things down. In Israel, all they really have is the Knesset. And the Knesset is a parliament. And that parliament works somewhat like the British, except here's the issue. In America, we have two major political parties. And maybe there are 5 parties, right? 5 or 6 parties. In Israel, they got 65 political parties. 65. Some of those parties are Arab parties. Some of those parties are conservative parties. Some of those parties are ultra-Orthodox parties. And so for someone to be elected to become the prime minister, like in England, you have your party has to win the most seats. And if you don't get enough seats, you have to create a coalition. And whoever, if you can create that coalition, whoever the leader of that coalition becomes the prime minister. Now, these are elected officials. And what's been happening since the founding of Israel is that the Knesset, that these are elected officials which set certain laws. And then you have a very liberal Israeli Supreme Court that would block those laws and throw those laws out. That they would say, they can't say it's unconstitutional because it's not a constitution in Israel. So when Netanyahu became the leader of Israel this last time, he wanted to change that. And what he was trying to do and what he was trying to implement was, he said, look, if the conservatives win, let's just call it the conservatives, and there's a Supreme Court seat that needs to be filled, they get to select. If it's the liberals, they get to select. And it created chaos through Israel. There were demonstrations. The military was saying they weren't going to fight. I'm going to tell you, this was a political crisis for Netanyahu. So you had the political crisis taking place, and you had intelligence coming into the leadership that didn't believe it, and they just dropped the ball. They dropped the ball. And that's what happened. That's how October 7th was allowed to happen. So now October 7th happens. Israel is a country of about 9 million people. 7 to 7.5 million people are Jewish. The rest, 7 to 7.5 million people are Jewish. The rest of the Israelis are they're Muslims, Arabs, or the Christians. 1,900 Israelis were killed on October 7th. 1,900. That's the equivalent of 48,000 Americans. Now, I may get so put yourself in the shoes of leadership. I've seen the video, I've seen the pictures. Children murdered, families murdered. Think about your grandchildren. Infants put in ovens. Ovens. Women raped multiple times, their bodies mutilated. Think about your families. What would you want to do? They want to kill them all. Hamas had, going into this war, 40,000 fighters. Israel killed or arrested about 25,000. What's happened in the last several weeks, Hamas has been able to bring in another 10, 15,000 fighters, but they're not trained. And I'll come to that in a minute. Since October 7th, Israel's been fighting a war on multiple fronts. 3 fronts. Hezbollah up north, Hamas down south, the Houthis, and to a certain extent, Iran. I'm going to take a step back and make you aware of something really interesting. Frank McKenzie, a Citadel grad, we were in school at the same time, Marine, 4-star Marine general, commanded Southcom, South Command. Several years ago, he cut a deal with Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, France, England, and the United States. And that deal was, if any of the countries is going to be attacked in the air, they would all come to each other's defense, not on the ground, but in the air. So one of the major leader of Hezbollah is at a meeting in Iran. Israel takes him out. Iran gets upset, fires multiple missiles at Israel. The coalition works. France, England, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel come together, knock all those weapon systems out the air, right? Iran does it again. For the most part, all those weapon systems are knocked out of the air. Now, what you got to understand about Iran is 92% of Iranians are pro-West. You got 7 to 8% of the Iranians that are these mullahs, and they're nuts. They're not stupid. They're nuts. They hate us and they hate Jews, and they want to kill us all. You need to know that. They want to kill us all. When Israel went into Iran, Saudi Arabia and Jordan asked Israel not to fly over their countries. So Israel flew sorties over Iraq and Syria. And on the way to Iran, they took out all the missile systems on those countries that they were flying over, and they went into Iran. They took out 100% of the Russian SR-200 missile defense systems, which was Iran's most sophisticated missile defense system that Iran has. And they took out, they did not take out their nuclear facilities, but they took out a couple of their weapon systems where they manufacture their missiles. And they basically wiped out Iran's air defense systems. Right now, Iran is naked. And right now, if America and Israel wanted to go in and fly missions, they could take anything out they wanted to right now. But there's only a limited amount of time. One of the things I want to share with you is that in war, traditionally, there's an 8-to-1 relationship between non-combatants killed versus combatants. And that's an historical average, okay? And that's almost in every war that's ever been fought. In Afghanistan, because of the smart weapons that the US has, America was able to knock that ratio down to about 3-to-1. Now, Israel is fighting an urban warfare where the combatants are hiding behind non-combatants. And that's in the news. I mean, the combatants they've got weapon systems in homes, under children's beds, weapon systems in mosques, weapon systems in hospitals, weapon systems in schools. Israel has done everything they possibly could to try to prevent non-combatants being killed. In this war, it's a 1-to-1 ratio between non-combatants killed versus combatants. So when you hear the news saying 50,000 Palestinians have been killed, that's probably an accurate number. Half of them are combatants, and the other half are non-combatants. I heard a call that I was able to listen to, and it was translated for me through my work with this intelligence group, where the Israelis were calling this family, this father of children and mother, and said, "We're coming in. You got to get your family out." And this father said, "Look, we value death like you value life. We're gonna," and they were all killed. All killed. I mean, what do you do? What do you do? I want to share this with you. I don't know if anybody saw the press conference between Netanyahu and the president a few weeks ago. Did you all see that? Well, the president said that America would take over Gaza. 2 days later, I was on a Zoom call with Netanyahu's national security advisor, a couple of Israeli generals, and a couple of Republican senators. And Netanyahu said, look, in all honesty, he didn't know the president was going to say that. That it was a surprise to him, but the more he thinks about it, he likes it. And the reason he likes it is they don't really know. They don't really know what the next step is in Gaza. They don't know. I mean, Gaza is destroyed. And you got 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. They got no place to go to. So the first thing that's got to happen is, if the war is over, which I'm going to tell you it's not over. The first thing that's got to happen is they got to get these people out. But nobody wants them. The Egyptians don't want them. The Jordanians don't want them. The reason why the Egyptians don't want them is that Egypt has their own problems with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is another terrorist group. The Hamas and Hezbollah, to a certain extent, is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they're concerned about their own leadership and ability to fight. Jordan is a very poor country. They have really good security around Amman, but the rest of the country, they really don't. When I was being vetted in the Senate for the ambassadorship, excuse me, and I would be asked, you think there'd be a two-state solution? And, you know, I would always say no. I mean, because I don't believe it can work. It can't work with when you're dealing with people you don't trust, right? You have to trust that your partners. And when there's no trust, well, it's over. I said, what would you do? I said, well, look, I mean, I'm not really a diplomat, right? I've just done deals and managed money for my career. But I said, this is what I know because I've been to Jordan. Jordan is poor. It's out of all Arab countries, it's the poorest country. I said, maybe the world should come up with $1 trillion and give some of that desert to the Palestinians, move them in there and give them their own country and let it border Jordan and Israel. Apparently, somebody is now listening because there's conversation to a certain extent about doing something like that. I didn't get the jobs at the time, so maybe at the time nobody really liked my idea, but I wanted to share that with you. One of the things that I want to share with you, Obama and Biden and Netanyahu do not get along. They don't like each other. They do not get along at all. But under the Obama administration, whatever Israel needed, Israel really got. Whatever it was they needed, Israel got. Biden, for the most part, Israel got what they needed, but towards the end, they weren't getting the supplies and the weapon systems they were needing. Under the Biden administration, they were slow walking or not sending the weapon systems that Israel has requested. One of the things that was running low for Israel was their missile defense system, because they were using it a lot every single day. They were having to defend their country. They were running low, and Biden wasn't. I understand now they've gotten everything they needed, but when the Biden administration was in, they weren't getting it. So the Houthis capable. So what I can tell you now is that Hamas is not really a fighting force. And what I think is going to happen is and Hamas knows this. If Israel can get all their hostages out, alive or dead, at that point, Israel is they're going to go back and they're going to attack Hamas, because Israel is not going to allow that to happen again, never again. They're not going to let that happen. And then the question will be, what will America do? And I don't know the answer to that. Up north, Israel's still dealing with Hezbollah. Israel basically wiped out the entire leadership of Hezbollah, and they're not really a fighting force right now. But I don't think they're going to be able to take Hezbollah out like they can Hamas. The Houthis are still a fighting force, and they have the ability to deliver weapon systems into Israel. And that's not just a problem for Israel, it's a problem for every country trying to ship goods and services around that strait. Was it the Hormuz Strait? So that's a problem. The current Israeli leadership, like I was saying earlier, they don't have a plan for next step. They don't know how to where to send the Palestinian people, how to destroy Hamas, and and how to rebuild. And Israel doesn't really have the money to rebuild Gaza. I'm not even sure if Israel. I'm being told by the Israeli leadership they don't want Gaza. They want somebody else to take it over, and that's still really unknown. So at this point, I'm glad to answer any questions. I tried to get what took longer than I thought. I'm sorry.
How many hostages are still?
There's about 28 to 30, and you don't know if they're alive or dead. Some of them are alive and some of them are dead.
You think an Israeli strike on the Iranian nuclear facility is imminent?
I would hope so, but here's the problem. Israel doesn't have the ability to knock them out. So Israel does not have the modern Buster bunker bombs that they needed. Even Trump wouldn't sell it to Israel. Israel also, there are about 17 nuclear facilities deep underground and are spread out through Iran. And from what I understand through the leadership in the U.S. military, even those Buster bunker bombs that we have can do damage to the nuclear facilities, but can't destroy them. The only thing that would really destroy those would be a tactical nuclear bomb, and nobody's going to use that. Israel has the ability only to take out 1 or 2 sites or do damage on 1 or 2 sites at one time because of the limitations of their air force. Israel only has 2 refuel jets, big jets that can refuel jets. And so they don't really have the air force to do that. They would really need America's help if we were going to go in and do that. From what I also understand, Iran really has nuclear, they have the nuclear capability now. What they don't have is the ability to deliver the nuclear weapon systems. And that's what they're working on. Questions?
About shutting off the oil to Iran, strangle Iran, where they can't give.
Well, that's what Trump is trying to do now. Trump is trying to, again, I don't want to get political, and you know, the maybe mistakes that were made in the prior administration, whatever. But what Trump really had Iran on their heels when he left. They were broke, and what he's trying to do, he does. You know, war is expensive, and the problem is America doesn't really know. Let me take a step back. What we don't know, what we do know is that there is a partnership now between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. That's been publicized. We know that. What we don't know, and what the intelligence community does not know, is what the real relationship is if we go into Iran. Will we have war with Russia and China? And that is an unknown. That's what we don't know. And nobody wants to, and even though we have the ability to probably take out Russia, Russia still has nuclear capabilities. Russia's military it's not a great military. China's military, if we went to war with China, that would be a problem. And the leadership in the US military will say, in all these games that they play, we lose almost in every one against China right now. Sometimes it's not good to know too much.
What would be your ideal outcome?
Well, I want to kill every one of those sons of bitches. Personally, I mean, you saw some of the things I saw.
Really no solution.
There's not a solution yet, sir. So one of the conversations was when I was on this Zoom call with Netanyahu, was about that. The reason why they said that Trump threw a hanging aid right into the conversation. And the purpose, what he's really trying to do is get these Arab countries to step up, to take in the Palestinians and help pay to rebuild Gaza. America doesn't have so if he wants to put America in Gaza, there's no way to do that without troops on the ground. No way. That's not going to happen. Because there'll always be terrorists there, and that will be an issue. So right now, nobody knows what the answer is, and it's not over. It's not even close to being over.
Well, there's the history of Qatar giving a lot of money to people.
Yeah.
And the Gaza Strip, so we know paying them doesn't work.
I'm sorry, Judd.
Paying them does not work.
Nothing works. Look, they hate us. They hate the Jews. They want to kill all of them. That's the problem that Israel has. They hate Americans. They hate the Israelis. So you can't negotiate them. You can't trust them because they want to kill you. They want to drive everybody out of Israel. They want to drive the Jews out of Israel. And I'm going to tell you, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm sorry. Questions?
What about Netanyahu? Is he going to survive all this?
My guess is he does.
Just now?
He does survive. My guess is he does survive. Yeah. Yeah. It's not over. I mean, he's got political enemies go after him. And my guess is, yeah, he survived. That is my guess, is that he survives. And the reason he survives is he's the strongest leader that Israel has right now. Question? Well, thank you.
present you with this book from our jail book collection, and that's if you sign up with your new Rotary. Speaker gift is.
Just find it.
May and the date.
That's.
And take a picture of every mark you sign, okay?
Have 20/20 vision.
Was it interesting? Reading glasses.
What's today?
27. Okay. All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming out today. Gail, thank you for joining us also. The program was fitting given that today is, or this month was Rotary International's Peace and Conflict Resolution Month. So do think about what Jack has brought to us today. Hope you all have a great afternoon. This meeting is adjourned.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's first shot. Thank you. That's the agenda. They want the hostage. Once it get out. No. And here's the thing about